The caretaker had been working in the large mansion for almost a year, yet most people barely noticed her. She moved quietly from room to room, carrying a small cart with cleaning supplies, dusting cloths, and a spray bottle that always clinked softly against the side. She didn't complain about the long hours or the heavy work. She simply did her job with calm patience, keeping her eyes low and her steps steady. Most days, no one spoke to her unless they needed something. She was used to that. Life had taught her to stay quiet and observe more than she spoke. The mansion itself was beautiful. Bright halls, tall windows, and polished floors that reflected the sunlight. But the one thing that always caught her attention was the grand piano in the main hall. It stood near the tall glass doors that opened to the garden. It was black, shiny, and looked almost untouched, as if someone had placed it there only to show it off. Sometimes, while passing by, she slowed her steps and looked at it with a soft expression. She never dared to touch it. She only admired it from a distance. The owner of the mansion was a wealthy man, known in town for his loud personality and love for showing off his wealth. He liked people knowing how successful he was. He wore expensive suits even when he was at home, and he surrounded himself with guests, business partners, friends, people who came only to enjoy good food and bragging conversations. The caretaker did not mind him. She simply stayed out of the way when he was around, but where others saw only a caretaker, someone who cleaned floors and polished furniture, there was something deeper hidden inside her, a part of her life no one seemed to notice. Long before she worked in this mansion, long before life became difficult, she had once been a girl who loved music more than anything else. Her grandfather had taught her how to play piano when she was young. She used to sit on a small wooden stool in his house while he sat beside her, guiding her hands gently while she learned each note. Those were some of her happiest memories, but she rarely thought about them now. Life had moved fast, and responsibility had pushed music to the back of her life. One afternoon, the mansion was full of noise again. The owner had invited a group of his friends for lunch. Their loud laughter and heavy footsteps echoed around the hall while the caretaker dusted a shelf nearby. She tried to finish her work quickly, hoping to leave the hall before they noticed her. But her eyes landed on the piano again. A thin layer of dust had settled on the top. Maybe that was the only reason she allowed herself to walk closer to it. She lifted her hand carefully and wiped the surface with her cloth. For a moment, her reflection appeared in the smooth surface. She paused, feeling a strange pull inside her chest, a mix of old memories and silent longing. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but she did not touch them. She only stood there, frozen between past and present. Just then, the owner walked in with his group. Their laughter stopped when they saw her standing by the piano. She quickly stepped back, lowering her eyes and holding the cloth tightly. But it was too late. They had already noticed her. "Oh, look at that," one of the men said with a mocking tone. "The caretaker wants to play piano now." The others chuckled, and the caretaker felt her cheeks grow warm. She wanted to walk away, but her feet stayed planted on the floor. The owner raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms with a smirk on his face. "Do you even know what that is?" he said, laughing lightly. "This piano cost more than everything you earn in a year." His friends laughed again. She stayed silent. She knew it was better to keep quiet, better not to argue. That was something life had taught her very well, but one of the guests, who had a playful but teasing personality, stepped forward and said, "Let her play." "Come on, what's the harm? Let's see if she actually knows anything." The owner laughed loudly at that suggestion. "Play? Her?" He shook his head. "She can't play. She only cleans." His words stung a little more sharply than he expected. The caretaker's fingers curled slightly against her cloth. Something inside her felt small, but another part remembered the warmth of her grandfather's hand guiding hers on the piano keys many years ago. The teasing man insisted again. "Seriously, let her try. I want to see this." Another guest joined in, encouraging the idea for their own amusement. The caretaker looked around at them. They weren't asking her to play, they were expecting her to embarrass herself. The owner looked at her as if the idea was ridiculous, but he finally nodded, amused. "Fine," he said. "Go on then." Show us what you can do." His voice carried the kind of confidence that assumed she would fail. The caretaker stood still, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She didn't want this attention. She had never wanted anyone to notice her. But something about the way they were laughing made her take a slow breath. She didn't want to prove anything to them. She didn't want praise. She just didn't want to be treated like someone incapable of more than sweeping floors. Very slowly, she walked toward the piano. The room became quiet, like everyone was waiting for a moment of entertainment. She sat down carefully on the stool, placing her hands in her lap before lifting them toward the keys. Her fingers shook slightly. She felt the weight of every eye in the room, the silence pressing against her shoulders. She had not played in years. Not seriously, not with emotion. She wondered if her hands even remembered how. She pressed one key lightly. The sound was soft but clear. It traveled through the hall like a whisper. The men exchanged amused looks, still expecting her to make mistakes. The owner stood with a half-smile, arms crossed, convinced she would stop after a few awkward notes, but the caretaker closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered sitting in her grandfather's house, the warm light falling across the old piano, the way his voice said, "Music is not about showing off. It's about speaking without words." She took a deep breath and let her fingers fall gently onto the keys. The first real note broke the silence like a warm breeze. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was pure. It carried a kind of depth that only comes from someone who has lived quietly and felt deeply. The owner's smile slowly faded, though he tried to hide it. His friends leaned forward with surprise flickering in their eyes. None of them expected this. They had thought she would hit random keys, maybe laugh nervously and walk away. But instead, the melody she played had structure, emotion, and a quiet beauty that filled the hall. Her fingers moved slowly at first, as if testing old memories. But soon the movements became smoother, more confident. It was as if the music had been waiting inside her all along, just waiting for a moment to breathe again. She wasn't playing for them. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply letting herself feel something she had buried for years. The owner uncrossed his arms, his expression shifting from amusement to mild shock. The men around him stopped whispering and simply watched. The caretaker seemed unaware of them now. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing softened, and she sank into the melody with full focus. The music filled every corner of the hall. It echoed gently off the walls, creating a stillness that made everyone forget what they had been laughing about moments before. They watched her with new eyes, realizing she wasn't just a caretaker. There was something more, something none of them had bothered to see. Her playing was not perfect, but that didn't matter. It carried a story of quiet struggles, hidden talents, forgotten dreams. She played as if talking through the piano, letting emotion speak in a way her voice never dared to. The caretaker didn't look up, not even once. Her world had narrowed to her fingertips and the keys beneath them. She didn't hear the silence behind her. She didn't see the stunned faces. She just played, letting the music flow like water through a broken dam. And then came the moment that changed everything. She struck a soft note that trembled through the air, and at that exact second, the owner felt something he couldn't explain. Embarrassment, guilt, respect, all mixed together. He had mocked her without knowing anything about her, without even considering she might carry something remarkable inside her. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the last note hung in the air for a moment. The room stayed silent, as if everyone was afraid to break the spell. That was the moment the owner realized something he had never expected, that the first note she played had already shut him up. For a long moment, the hall stayed completely silent after she finished playing. The caretaker kept her eyes lowered, unsure of what to do next. Her hands were still slightly trembling from the emotion that had rushed through her while playing. She had not expected to lose herself in the music like that. She had not expected the notes to carry so much weight or to awaken memories she had pushed away for years. But more than anything, she had not expected the quiet behind her. Slowly, she stood up from the piano stool. She felt the atmosphere behind her shift, like the room itself had softened. When she finally turned toward the group, She was surprised to see every face frozen in disbelief. The owner, who had spent the entire morning bragging, stood there silently with his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't understand what had just happened. The caretaker felt a strange mix of emotions: embarrassment, nervousness, and a quiet strength she had not felt in years. She thought maybe she should apologize for taking too long or for interrupting their gathering, but before she could say anything, one of the guests spoke first. How do you play like that?" he asked softly, no longer mocking or laughing. His tone carried genuine amazement. She didn't know how to answer. She looked down at her hands and said quietly, "I learned when I was young." The owner stepped forward, slower than usual, as if unsure whether to speak. His voice came out lower, without the usual confidence. You never said anything." She wasn't sure what he expected her to say. She answered honestly, "No one ever asked." Those 4 words hit him harder than anything else she could have said. He looked away for a moment, almost embarrassed to meet her eyes. The same man who had mocked her only minutes earlier now found himself unable to speak. His friends exchanged looks, unsure whether they should say something or stay silent. The caretaker gently wiped her hands on her uniform, unsure what to do next. She thought maybe she should leave the hall and return to her duties, but as she turned to step away, the owner finally found his voice again. "Wait," he said quickly. She paused. He walked closer. His expression serious now, not playful or proud. "Why did you stop playing?" he asked. "With talent like that? Why would you ever leave music?" She hesitated. She didn't like talking about her personal struggles, especially not in front of a group of strangers who had just mocked her. But she also didn't want to lie. So she answered simply, "Life becomes different when responsibilities come. Some dreams have to be left behind." Her voice remained calm, but there was a quiet sadness hidden between the words. The owner heard it. "So did everyone else?" Another guest spoke softly. "Your grandfather must have been a good teacher." Her eyes softened. "He was," she whispered. "He taught me everything." A feeling washed over the room: respect, compassion, maybe even guilt. The caretaker didn't notice it fully, but the owner did. He realized he had misjudged someone he barely knew. He felt a sting of regret, something he was not used to feeling. He cleared his throat, trying to gather his thoughts. "You played beautifully," he said sincerely. "Better than anyone I've hired for my events?" The caretaker looked surprised. "Thank you," she replied politely, unsure how to react to praise from someone who had laughed at her only moments earlier. He took a small breath and continued, "Listen, I'm sorry for how I spoke to you earlier. I shouldn't have. I was wrong." The caretaker blinked slowly. She had never expected an apology from him. Not once in the entire year she had worked there had she seen him apologize to anyone. He was a man who always believed he was right, no matter what. Hearing him speak like that felt strange, surprising, but in a quiet way, meaningful. She nodded gently, accepting his apology without making a big scene out of it. She didn't like attention, and she didn't want him to feel uncomfortable either, but the owner wasn't done. Something inside him had shifted. "Would you—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Would you be willing to play at one of my gatherings?" "Not as staff. As a musician." The caretaker felt her heartbeat quicken. She opened her mouth slightly, unsure what to say. She had not performed in front of an audience in years. The idea frightened her a little. But she also felt a spark, small, gentle, but real. Something inside her whispered that perhaps she still had a place in the world of music. "I don't know if I can," she said honestly. "I haven't played seriously in a long time." "You can," the owner said without hesitation. "I heard you. Everyone here heard you. You have real talent." The guests nodded in agreement, their earlier arrogance replaced by genuine respect. They were no longer looking at her as a caretaker. They were looking at her as someone special, someone who had surprised them all with a kind of beauty they didn't expect. The caretaker smiled faintly, a shy but sincere smile. Maybe I can try," she said softly. The owner smiled too, for the first time without pride, just warmth. "I'd be honored," he said. The caretaker felt something ease inside her chest. She wasn't used to compliments or opportunities, but she appreciated the sincerity. She stepped back, ready to return to her work. But something about the air around her felt different now, lighter. More respectful. As she walked away from the hall, the guests watched her with admiration, still surprised that someone so quiet, someone they had overlooked, carried such a powerful gift. The owner stood there, thinking about how easily he had misjudged her. He felt almost ashamed of how quickly he had dismissed her earlier, but more importantly, he felt grateful. She had given him a moment that reminded him that talent, beauty, and strength often exist in places people ignore. She had taught him something without saying much at all. The caretaker continued her work for the rest of the day, moving from room to room just as she always did. But inside, something had changed. She felt lighter. She felt seen. She felt a small flame inside her growing again. A flame she thought had died out long ago. She sat alone during her break later that evening, thinking about everything that had happened. She replayed the notes in her mind, the softness of the piano keys under her fingers. She remembered the way the room had fallen silent, the way even the owner had looked at her differently. She remembered how it felt to play freely again, without fear or doubt. It had been a long time since she felt pride in herself, not pride in a showy way, but the gentle kind, the kind that warms the heart quietly. The next day, when she entered the mansion, the piano was waiting for her in the hall as always. But this time, it didn't feel like an object out of reach. It felt like something that belonged to her world again, something she did not need to fear. And though she still moved quietly, though she still did her work with the same patience and calmness, something inside her had been awakened for good. The millionaire, who once saw her as just another staff member, now greeted her with respect. His voice softened whenever he spoke to her. His friends, who had once laughed, now nodded to her politely. And the piano, once just furniture in a grand mansion, had now become a bridge between her past and her future. She didn't know where this new path would lead, whether she would perform at events or continue to keep music as something personal. But she knew one thing for sure. The moment she played that first note, the world around her changed. Not because of applause, not because of praise, but because she remembered who she truly was, and without even trying, without raising her voice or fighting back, she had shut the millionaire up with nothing more than the truth of her talent.